The things I always encourage people with is you have to crawl before you can walk. You have to walk before you can run. A lot of benefits out here from cover crops where we are seeing the ability to reduce fertilizer and get a higher cost per acre return. Those are from guys who have been doing cover crops for a lot of years.
That's great. So, Illinois Court, we're really committed to advocating for innovation and flexibility on all sorts of these programs. I guess if you had the magic wand, what would you put in a program, or how would you develop a program or like to see change that you think would make the most sense for the farmers that you work with?
Absolutely. I think there needs to be a tool in there to put some of this back at the county level. Um, every county has a NRCS district conservationist, and a lot of those folks have a true amount of agronomy training. And they need the ability to sit here and go, this is that fall everybody's pushed, but conditions are great. Let's extend the seeding period for 2 weeks and grant that. Or, in our area, we've tried this for a couple of years. We know this rate can be lowered successfully. It's working. Let's put some control back in the hands of the local district conservationists and the independent experts to help tailor some things that work. One thing that's really frustrating to me is certain species that we have had a lot of success establishing with planes or drones aren't actually included on that list because of their small seed size. Well, I would agree that they're not a good option if you seed them by themselves because the plane and the drone can't spread them out over the acres. But if we put them in a mix, it kind of helps keep them in suspension and makes for a really, really nice mix and everything. So I would love to see the recommendations come back to a local level and see more input from experts who have the hands-on. We're looking at some summer mixes for guys, and for example, the tool, the way it exists, it has species that are allowed to be planted May, June, July, but it doesn't take into account those species' shade tolerance. So when we start looking at things like shade tolerance, we can plant at different dates. So we can put cool seasons in June and July because they're going to be kept cooler under the corn canopy. So right now, we just don't have the flexibility that we need. And I really think that is something long-term that we need to help encourage guys to use more cover crops, but also make it so that the ones using the cover crops are more successful.
Absolutely. And when we think about that, Illinois on a good year maybe has 4% of all of our acres covered with a cover crop. And we would probably say most of that cover crop's going ahead of soybeans, not even ahead of corn. So if you have a farmer,
Absolutely.
one of these 96% are attributing to those acres that don't have a cover crop today, and they walk in your door, what are the things they should ask or think about if they're looking at a cover crop? Things around what might be a simple species to try. What is it, a certified seed versus a bin run? I mean, what really matters? What should a farmer, if they're thinking about dipping their toe in, what should they ask?
Absolutely. So we usually start with asking them a few questions. And the first question I always ask them is why? Why do you want to do a cover crop? What's your goal? Not every cover crop out there can provide the same benefit. So if you're after fixing nitrogen, cereal rye is not what we use. But if you're after weed suppression and erosion control, it's a great option. So we start with the why, and then we follow up with what tools in the toolbox do you have? Meaning, what do you have for equipment either to get it established or to get it terminated? Making sure that we have tools to manage it so that we don't have a negative impact on the cash crop is very, very important. And then it comes down to, okay, what is the reality you have this year? What is your hybrid maturity? When do we see ourselves harvesting? Have we sprayed a herbicide that's going to prohibit things from germinating? So we ask a lot of questions at first and then kind of help to develop a detailed plan. The things I always encourage people with is you have to crawl before you can walk. You have to walk before you can run. A lot of benefits out here from cover crops where we are seeing the ability to reduce fertilizer and get a higher cost per acre return. Those are from guys who have been doing cover crops for a lot of years. You typically don't see someone jump into a 15 species mix and have a lot of success because they're not set up to manage it. So instead, a lot of times we'll use cereal rye ahead of soybeans that first year, and we'll use oats and radish ahead of corn. And I always kind of treat those mixes as kindergarten. They're getting us started. They get us some benefit, but they're certainly not the most beneficial thing we could be doing, but they're lower risk than a lot of other options. Once we figure out our equipment, our timings, there's a lot to manage cover crops. Over the next few years, we can start pushing it a little bit further, starting to incorporate Other species such as legumes and brassicas, so crimson clover, hairy vetch, things that'll fix nitrogen, with things that'll break up compaction like rapeseed, turnips, radish. So we diversify after a period of time. The biggest thing I always encourage someone when they are making a seed mix is to make sure that no matter whether you're buying the seed off of a neighbor who grew it, someone like us, or someone out of state, always make sure that that seed is clean and tested. You do not want to bring something in that could potentially create more problems for you down the road. I also will throw in that I am a big fan of northern grown seed as opposed to southern grown seed. As farmers planting cover crops, one of the things we're most concerned about is winter hardiness, especially if we know we put it in a little later than what would be ideal. We want to make sure that we are pulling out of an area that typically has as severe, if not more severe, a winter. Pulling in cereal rye from Texas or Oklahoma, it's typically going to go dormant a little bit quicker than something from further north. So knowing what we have by getting a seed test and having it cleaned and knowing where it came from so that we know how it can perform are very important things to think about.
No, that's great. And I love the analogy of thinking about going through school and starting in kindergarten and working our way up. And also I think that's really practical advice about knowing where your seed comes from. So great conversation today. Laura, thank you again for joining us on this episode of Illinois Corn TV. You shared a lot of great information and your expertise is extremely valuable. We look forward to having you again soon and hope you have a great rest of the year.
Thank you so much for having me. We appreciate the opportunity to share some cover crop knowledge with everybody and really appreciate all that Illinois Corn is doing in hopes of making cover crops easier for everyone in Illinois.